Australian organised white-collar crime is running rampant. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir. How are you today?
Very good. How are you going?
Always interesting in the world of ASIC, Martin. It has been a few weeks since we've discussed ASIC and the ASIC Inquiry, and no doubt our viewers will be consumed with world events given what has happened in the Middle East over the weekend. But we won't touch that subject today, but we will come back to the ASIC Inquiry, which we have been on a long campaign on. And the reason why I think it's important that we come back to this topic, Martin, is that I have been unofficially told at this point that I will be called to provide evidence to the ASIC Inquiry on the 1st of November, which will be the next date of the next public hearing. And obviously ASIC has informally called me a nutcase. They've called my work the Adams Report, which we publicized 12 months ago on this channel. They've called it superficial and oversimplified. And so in the world of ASIC, I have zero credibility, and yet it would appear that the ASIC Inquiry is going to call a nutcase YouTuber to provide a testimony to federal parliament. And it should be a very interesting experience in 3 weeks' time, because there will be a lot of interesting and controversial things that I will have to that I'm prepared to say. And obviously, as we've discussed on our previous shows, testifying to Parliament carries the protection of parliamentary privilege, and with that privilege, anything can be said, and it is inadmissible in court. So we're still working on some detail as to how controversial and how extensive my comments may be, but it may be narrow, or it could be one of the most extraordinary public displays I've ever done. So we'll have to see how that unfolds. But in that context, Martin, I thought it'd be worthwhile to come back and remind the audience of what this ASIC Inquiry is all about. And 12 months ago, I published a 2-volume report, and I said that ASIC, when it comes to these reports of alleged misconduct, is failing to adequately conduct investigations or start investigations. And we did a show last year with the question, is the financial cops helping the financial crooks? And so last week, there was a day of hearings with the ASIC Inquiry. A lot of new evidence was presented, which was very damning against ASIC. There was some damning data, which we're going to talk about in today's show. But there was also some witnesses who, again, independent of me, who have come forward to heavily criticize ASIC and their general performance around not only commencing investigations or dealing with reports of alleged misconduct, but also the manner in which they conduct investigations.
Right. Well, it's the continuing saga, isn't it? And, the more the evidence builds up, the more we know that ASIC is a very sick puppy, to put it politely. So kudos to you on the upcoming disclosure in front of Parliament. That's going to be important. But, every time that we hear more stories from people, it gets worse and worse. It underscores the same trends again and again, doesn't it?
Yes, well, it's very interesting you should say that, Martin, because to my mind, and to I think the mind of the inquiry, the evidence is overwhelming that there is systemic failure at ASIC. And yet Chairman Longo, back at June, in his opening statement, said that, quote, ASIC rejects any suggestion that ASIC is a weak corporate regulator. And so the evidence that came out last week, which we'll go through in today's show, demonstrates that ASIC and all of their public statements is basically, what they say is so removed from the actual reality of the situation that ASIC basically has little credibility left with the inquiry, because the numbers are the numbers, and the numbers basically say that they're doing a woeful job. But before we get into the numbers, Martin, is There was a witness last week called Lachlan Walden, who I don't know and never met before, and he provided a very devastating opening statement in regards to ASIC's failure to properly regulate the Australian share market and the Australian Stock Exchange. And I thought it'd be worthwhile to hear his opening statement before we actually get into the key data that I want to go through in today's show.
Yes, thanks, Senator. My name's Lachlan Walden, and I'm an independent trader and investor.
Thanks. Do you have an opening statement, a brief opening statement?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Thank you. On ASX trading days, I am in front of a screen watching criminals steal money off Australian investors whilst seemingly nobody notices and the regulator ASIC does nothing. After many years of this, it's becoming an incredibly frustrating Groundhog Day paradigm. I'm a self-taught, independent professional investor and trader. I don't have any conflicts of interest, as so many ASX participants have with certain brokers, companies, and investor groups. I don't rely on other people giving me special access, information, or preferential allocations to IPOs and placements. I'm one of a few in this industry with absolutely nothing to hide. In my written submission, I've outlined 15 ways criminals are taking advantage of ASIC's lack of regulation on the ASX. I have also suggested 5 straightforward recommendations ASIC could immediately implement to better ensure the integrity of the Australian share market. Insider trading is endemic to the ASX, particularly amongst small caps. White-collar criminals act without hesitation because there is no deterrent. Is ASIC failing to take action on blatant insider trading due to a lack of evidence? No, certainly not. It's not even about a lack of resources. The truth is, ASIC is a largely useless regulator with a firmly ingrained culture of apathy and incompetence. The ASIC complaints form doesn't allow descriptions of more than around 300 words, and you can't upload any attachments of evidence. That, in and of itself, speaks volumes. ASIC are not interested in complaints and almost always treat them as irrelevant notes to file away in their archives. It has got to the point where individuals can recklessly self-incriminate themselves for blatant insider trading in ASX announcements and compulsory regulatory filings, and yet nothing happens when reports are made to ASIC. Small cap companies know they don't have to properly comply with continuous disclosure requirements since they won't ever get pulled up on anything. From my reports to ASIC, the only matter looked into was a fraudulent IPO right after they were getting negative press about Nuix. Even then, incredibly, they let the fraudulent business list after only a brief delay. There is no public confidence in ASIC to enforce the law. Sadly, people who want market integrity, like myself, often now don't even bother reporting matters to ASIC, as we know it's futile and won't get investigated. ASIC says they monitor the market in real time, but the truth is that they have no real-time detailed market visibility whatsoever and have embarrassingly admitted as such in press releases in recent years addressing organised pump and dump schemes. ASIC are always behind the game, and there's no better example than during 2021 when ASX pump and dumps were taking place daily based on Telegram groups where ASIC resorted to calling the criminal misconduct out in the media rather than actually looking into the underlying trades and taking regulatory action as any reasonable person would expect them to. The ASIC press release at the time implored brokers to help ASIC, quote, understand whether one or multiple clients are responsible for several trades, end quote. It is frankly ridiculous, but ASIC seriously expects to outsource its market regulation to brokers employing inexperienced, overworked designated trading representatives. ASIC is the regulator, so should be the one body with full visibility, whereas individual brokers can only see a small part of the puzzle and so generally aren't able to identify all market participants. On the 12th of October 2021, ASIC stated in a press release, quote, we are using social media platforms to directly engage with people who are involved in blatant pump and dump activity, end quote. A competent regulator doing its job would issue a press release confirming the prompt identification of the individual trading accounts responsible, closure of dozens of retail trading accounts across a number of brokers, and criminal charges against the instigators. ASIC should have also immediately halted the pump stocks trading on the ASX and reversed all trades. According to ASIC's own submission to this inquiry, There are 82 full-time equivalent employees in the markets group responsible for market supervision. Considering the egregious pump and dumps, insider trading, and market manipulation taking place on a daily basis, you really have to wonder what these employees do. There's a culture that's grown where the dodgy characters on the ASX get away with small indiscretions, and eventually, soon enough, company directors, brokers, and traders push the limits, knowing full well that there's no tough cop on the beat and will not be any repercussions. I would now welcome the opportunity to expand upon anything of interest to the committee.
The reason why I think this clip is important is you have an independent stock trader who has deep experience in actually observing what happens on the Australian share market, someone who can witness ongoing systemic in terms of misconduct, insider trading, pump and dump schemes, someone who's gone to ASIC to raise the alarm, and ASIC basically is not interested in actually addressing the systemic problems in terms of the various trading patterns that would give certain players an unfair advantage and actually doesn't serve mum and dad investors at home well in terms of having a honest and freely fair and a freely traded stock market that is fair to investors. So I thought his testimony and talking about the systemic failures at ASIC, again, another independent voice saying that there is major problems and how ASIC not only receives reports of alleged misconduct and how they handle them, but also how they go about conducting investigations. So now, Martin, given that we've heard from Mr. Bolden, I just want to obviously go back to the key trends that I talked about last year in terms of the Adams report, because I will be testifying about the Adams report and there'll be questions from both Senators Bragg and Walsh about this. So what did I say last year, Martin? So if we can go on to slide one of the key trends that I basically said, Martin, is that when you look at ASIC's own data over the last 11 years, you see that when it comes to reports of alleged misconduct resulting in no further action, it has gone through the roof on a percentage basis over the last 11 years. So the more reports of alleged misconduct they are getting in recent years, they are just discarding those and actually doing nothing with. And so this trend is important, Martin, is because behind these numbers are real people and real case studies and real victims of financial fraud, but also in terms of broader examples of corporate and financial services misconduct. And so while I was able to present statistical patterns and numbers, what this inquiry has been able to demonstrate effectively is to show the human face behind what happens when ASIC does not properly investigate examples of misconduct and people are left with massive financial losses and they have basically a financial police force unwilling to serve the public interest.
Yeah, and it's pretty astonishing just to think about how much it's gone up over the last few years. So what that means is that there's less and less active work that ASIC is actually doing. And I guess you can ask the question about to what extent are they actually ticking and flicking or not. But the net result is, how can this be the outcome if the regulator is actually an effective regulator?
Indeed. Now, the thing is that if we can just go on to slide 2, just to, again, re-highlight for our audience that I'll be talking about in 3 weeks' time, this slide says that from July of 2015, the average rejection rate of whistleblower disclosures is 91%. So they only act to actually investigate only 9% when whistleblowers come forward. And that is actually a very, again, alarming and very disturbing statistic. If we go to slide 3, Martin, we have the number of new investigations that are opened per year. Again, going back to financial year 2014-15, we had approximately around 237 new investigations open that year. And since then, the decline in new investigations opening at ASIC has gone through the floor. And in financial year 21-22, it was the lowest on record. Now, Martin, one of the interesting things to note is that between now and the 1st of November when I testify, the new ASIC annual report will be coming out. And so we'll be able to get some new numbers about financial year 22-23, and we'll be able to see whether the patterns in these three slides have continued, or has there been a counter trend? Has they actually improved, or have they stabilized? So there'll be some new data they'll be able to play with, and that'll be very interesting to call out whether what happened in the last 12 months or the last financial year, and whether how did ASIC go and actually in terms of policing the financial system. Now, a couple of months ago, Martin, Senator Roberts from One Nation asked some questions of ASIC about me and my analysis, and including the Adams report, and in terms of these trends that I was able to put together using ASIC's own numbers, which Treasury has said is quite substantially correct. So what was ASIC's position about my report? And again, the reason why this is important, Martin, is that ASIC's strategy when it comes to me is to say that I have no credibility. I'm just a YouTube loudmouth from Wollongong, and the inquiry should not take me seriously at all. But here's what ASIC told Parliament in the inquiry on the 7th of August, quote, Mr. Adams' analysis is oversimplified and superficial. It fails to take into account ASIC's role, the broad nature of its obligations, and its strategic approach to assessing all the information provided to it to strategically select matters for investigation and enforcement action. ASIC's focus is on directing resources to achieve maximum regulatory impact. It is not an agency set up to primarily respond to and action complaints. Now, before we get into the data that proves this statement to be categorically false and BS, Martin, you obviously read my report last year. We did a number of shows about it. So what is your reaction to ASIC's official position on the record about the Adams report?
Well, it does seem strange insofar that the data is definitely pointing in one direction, whereas ASIC is saying something different. So unless the information as contained in all the reports, which nobody's questioning, is not giving a fair indication of what ASIC is up to, I have to say that ASIC is, well, being flexible with the truth, to put it politely. The fact is that surely if you are actually a regulator, the ability to be able to demonstrate effectiveness has got to be against the numbers that you're actually publishing. And yet they publish the numbers. It's not your numbers, it's their numbers. And it shows they're not effective. So words and figures differ.
Now, the key thing I want to highlight, Martin, before we move on to the next series of slides, is that the key language from the ASIC statement is that they are seeking to achieve maximum regulatory impact. So they're saying it's not necessarily a function of how many complaints we process or how many investigations we start. It's really, we are doing the most important cases and we are getting the best bang for the buck. I mean, that's what ASIC's claim is, and that's why they say that focusing purely on their processing numbers is insufficient to tell the overall story. Now, Martin, if we can go to the next slide. Last week, Senator Bragg put out a press release based on data that the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions provided to the ASIC inquiry about how many criminal referrals or referrals related to criminal breaches of the law has ASIC provided to the CDPP, the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions. So just so the audience is clear, ASIC investigates both civil breaches of the law and criminal breaches of the law. If there's a civil breach of the law and there's a fine to be had, ASIC has the ability to commence proceedings in court and sue a company for some sort of civil fine, misleading, deceptive conduct, or things of that nature. But when it comes to a criminal case where ASIC believes that people should go to jail for their criminal activity, those referrals have to be sent to the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions, and it is the CDPP that is responsible for bringing the criminal case to court, whether it's a federal court or a state court, and the CDPP is responsible for basically running the court case with ASIC's assistance. So ASIC does the investigation and the CDPP basically runs the criminal case in court with the objective of attempting to get a criminal conviction. And some of these cases may involve either a judge or it may actually involve a jury. And obviously, if it's a criminal case, the standard is beyond reasonable doubt, which is a much higher standard than a civil case, which is just the balance of probabilities. Now, Martin, according to data provided by the CDPP to the inquiry, if we go back 5 years to financial year 18-19, which is just after or actually during the Royal Commission, ASIC referred 86 cases to the CDPP for processing. Last financial year, they only referred 41 cases to the CDPP for criminal charges. So one of the key points that Senator Bragg made in his press release last week is that the number of referrals for criminal prosecution has halved in the last 5 years. And again, ASIC claims that they do things to achieve maximum regulatory impact. And yet now we see that their willingness or their appetite or their ability to refer cases where they believe people need to go to jail has basically collapsed in 5 years. And that is obviously a concerning indicator as to whether they are actually effectively policing the law.
And of course, John, it's worth noting that as well as the press release, Senator Bragg did actually make a YouTube short. And in fact, we're going to play that because he actually makes his points, I think, very well. So let's play that clip.
We have a massive problem with corporate crime in Australia. If you break the law in Australia in relation to something like insider trading and you're able to rip off mum and dad investors, you're likely to get away with it because ASIC doesn't bring many actions into the court, and the Director of Public Prosecutions have shown that, in fact, ASIC is making half as many referrals as they did just 5 years ago. And of those referrals, only about 20% of those are actually going into the courtroom. So unfortunately, if you are engaging in wrongdoing in corporate Australia, you are quite likely to get away with it, which is hugely regrettable. And there's no wonder that Australians were so disappointed to see all the PricewaterhouseCoopers business happen earlier this year.
Now, Martin, if we can go to the next slide. So this slide talks about how many prosecutions have actually been instituted by the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions based on a ASIC referral. So if we go back to financial year 18-19, so there was 86 cases that was referred by ASIC to the CDPP, and how many cases did they actually start as opposed because of these referrals? They commenced 65 actions in financial year 18-19. But if we look at last financial year, of 41 cases that was referred to the CDPP for processing, the CDPP only started 8 criminal trials resulting from a referral from ASIC. So you think to yourself, ASIC does all this work, they have all these resources, they do fewer investigations, and the number of investigations has collapsed. And they're saying that don't focus on the number of investigations, don't worry about our processing of whistleblower disclosures, don't worry about this issue of no further action. Look at the outcomes we achieve. And the outcomes when it comes to trying to put people in jail for breaching the law, the number of referrals to the CDPP has more than halved. And then if you look at the number of actual court cases that start in court has gone from 65 5 years ago for one financial year only down to 8. And what it says to me, and I had the opportunity to meet a senator tied to the inquiry in the last 24 hours, my assessment based on the new data that has been presented is that the regime, or the ASIC regime under Joseph Longo and Longo-Court has been an abysmal failure. I mean, ASIC was a complete disaster under former chairmen, say Medcraft and James Shipton, but it has even actually gotten worse in terms of their ability to enforce the law significantly and in terms of effectively, because there's fewer cases in which they are seeking a criminal conviction. And just to round this out before we get you to comment is, if we look at the last slide, so again, how many cases that ASIC refers that resolves in terms of a court case? It was about 75% 5 years ago of a referral to ASIC, a referral to the CDPP that started a court case. Last financial year, it was only 20%. So if you look at 8 proceedings commenced out of 41 referrals, that's 20%. And so the percentage strike rate of actually referring something that actually gets to a courtroom, it's 20%. So what this says to me, Martin, is that it doesn't matter what John Adams says. I mean, the numbers speak volumes. There's been a sustained decline in operational performance in terms of ASIC. They are processing fewer complaints. They ignore whistleblowers to the tune of 91%. They are doing fewer and fewer investigations, and their willingness or their appetite to refer cases for criminal prosecution has collapsed in the last 5 years. And there are only a fraction of cases in which actually see a courtroom. And just to highlight this, the chairman of ASIC is on an annual salary of more than $820,000. The deputy chair of ASIC, Sarah Court, is on an annual salary of $650,000. And Sarah Court is the chair of the ASIC Enforcement Committee. And for $650,000, what do we get for last financial year? Only 8 cases seeing a courtroom in a criminal context. And we have seen example after example during the ASIC inquiry of major misconduct occurring right across the board when it comes to financial criminals, financial crime, fraud, etc. And in a number of those cases, ASIC is unwilling to take certain companies or certain individuals to trial on a criminal case, and they have allowed certain people to get away with major fraud and major financial crime. And while ASIC will attempt to paint these numbers in a completely different way, the evidence is overwhelming. We have a police force in the financial system that it was bad. It is a lot worse than it used to be. It's a complete joke. And my view, and I think your view, and I think the inquiry is coming to the view also that you cannot tinker with ASIC to fix it. You must burn it to the ground and seek to rebuild the financial police force from the ashes into something new, perhaps not the same agency, maybe 2 agencies, where you split some of the functions and you get a better structure with new leadership, new capability. And that's the only way we're going to actually fix financial crime in this country, because the status quo is failing. It's getting worse. And white-collar criminals run rampant in this country. Scams happen all the time. People lose their money due to major fraud. And there is no guardian that is protecting investors and protecting the financial system.
That's it, right, John. And just to underscore, what it means is that anybody who is actually an investor or bumping up against a corporate, there is no safety net. There is no means of getting justice if something goes wrong. So it cuts to the heart of the way the economy works, and it cuts to the heart of the way that investors are exposed. And, those numbers, to my mind, just underscore again that ASIC is completely ineffective. And I suppose if you divided the number of court cases against the money that they earn, from a value for money perspective, it's a joke. So whichever way you look at it, there's a severe problem here. And I'm finding it amazing that the people, the leadership team within ASIC seem completely oblivious. Now, are they oblivious because they just don't get it? Or are they being deliberately obstructive? I don't know. But hopefully that's something which the Senate inquiry will come to, because I agree with you. The only way to solve this, and it's a critical necessity to solve it because of the need for the investment community in Australia to know that it actually works appropriately, is for a complete restructure. So maybe you restructure it into multiple entities, give different responsibilities for different parts of the regulatory framework. But at the moment, it is completely ineffective, which means that investors are working without a safety net.
Yes, I mean the thing is that I do think that the current leadership team is completely oblivious to how bad their performance is. I mean, because I don't think they're stupid, but I just think they are completely out of touch. compared to both community expectations, but also in terms of how bad misconduct is actually happening in terms of the Australian economy. So, because Martin, I don't think we have a laissez-faire regulator. I think we have financial anarchy. We basically have a financial system where there is little to no enforcement, little to no investigation. And you cannot, look, ASIC cannot claim that in the last 5 years, there has been such a substantial improvement in terms of corporate behavior that these numbers basically, I mean, if these numbers were legitimate, you would say that people are behaving much better. Therefore, there's no need to refer cases to the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions because there's less crime. If that's ASIC's position, I think that's just a complete joke. And I think the inquiry has exposed that proposition can't be sustained. And so I think we do have, again, ongoing crime, and they haven't come to a view, or they haven't come to terms with actually doing the job that Parliament and the community requires them to do. And I mean, Martin, we have been criticised by some members of the audience because people want us to go back and talk about economics and various markets, and obviously there are important issues around interest rates and mortgage stress and the fight for cash in the banks and all of this sort of stuff, and they're all important topics. But when it comes to growing your wealth and in terms of investing, if you don't actually have financial police that are regulating the market, how do you actually invest with confidence, knowing that your investments are going to be, that you're not going to be the victim of a swindle due to fraud or criminal behavior? So that's why you need to have free and effective markets, but you need effective regulation that protects investors so that when people do commit their capital to an investment asset, that they can be confident that if they do lose money, it's because of developments in the market, as opposed to shonky operators or crooks that have stolen their money through some sort of sophisticated scam. And so if you have an effective regulator, if you have a well-policed market, well, then then obviously getting into the market analysis is quite important. But if you basically have corporate cowboys that basically engage in systemic fraud and rip people off left, right, and center, quite frankly, to my mind, it doesn't matter if price of a good or service goes up or down, or a stock indice or whatever the asset class may be, because price is relevant when you're basically dealing with thieves and crooks.
Well, that's right, John. And the bottom line is this, that we've got a wild west at the moment where, the investment market is really not policed appropriately, where people risk losing life savings and worse. And the cop that's meant to be in charge of it is not doing its job. And all the statistics show it. All of the evidence that we've had over recent weeks and months underscore it too. So the next month or so will be really important, and I guess your evidence on the 1st of November will be a critical next step in terms of where this conversation takes us. But it's a burning requirement to get it sorted, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, we're only 3 days out from the referendum in terms of the voice. The polls say that 60% plus of the country is going to reject the voice, and there's going to be a resounding defeat. What a waste of time, what a waste of public money, what a waste of public energy on something that was poorly explained and basically has been a complete distraction from actually fixing the most important and critical economic problems that the country faces. And so, Martin, in summary, what I can say to the audience is that in about 3 weeks' time, I will be a YouTuber appearing before the ASIC Inquiry, going through these numbers and making the case as to why ASIC is an agency full of systemic failure. And even though ASIC has called me a nutcase and has questioned my mental stability, this will be my opportunity to take, my research and the good work we've done on this channel and my public advocacy, and actually, under parliamentary privilege, tell Parliament that it's now time that after 15 years of failure, and that failure continues to get worse by the year, It's time now that Parliament sees the opportunity to collapse ASIC and to recreate a financial police force that actually is going to work in this country, because the status quo is an abject failure and the country deserves something much better than what we have been able to witness over the last 15 years.
Absolutely, John. Well, we'll keep reporting back in the interest of the people, keep on driving the message home, and we'll talk next time, John, as this journey continues. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.